Top 20 horrific facts about the Old West's most infamous town, named Tombstone, Arizona. The heart of the Wild West, where legends were born and buried, lies a town that etched its name in history, Tombstone, Arizona. The town attracted some of the outlaws of its time. Tombstone stands frozen in time, and as the name suggests, it holds secrets in its graveyards, where restless souls still wander the grounds. Here are the top 20 horrific facts about the Old West's most infamous town named Tombstone, Arizona. Number 20. Phantom. Tombstone's got quite the history, you know, full of spooky tales and ghostly encounters. Now, one of the creepiest stories revolves around room 119 in the old Tombstone Hotel. Some dude supposedly hanged himself there. Guests swear they've heard voices and seen stuff moving by itself. It gives me the creeps. Around the Wells Fargo Bank building, they say a ghostly dude in a fancy frock coat hangs out, and there are ghostly stage drivers and cowboys wandering around too. And get this, in front of the CS Fly studio, folks smell perfume out of thin air. Weird, right? Now, the Crystal Palace Saloon has its own ghost party. Big Nose Kate's ghost supposedly chills there. People have seen things moving around on their own, lights flickering and gambling wheels spinning. Heck, the place is supposedly packed with phantom cowboys and spirits, making it a real haunted hotspot in town. It gives me the chills just thinking about it, man. Number 19. Money Talks. Even though the Cochise County Cowboys had a bad reputation as outlaws, they weren't actually kicked out of Tombstone. It's kind of surprising, right? The reason was that they were big spenders. They used their stolen money to splurge in the town's businesses, making the local merchants pretty happy. Even though the cowboys were troublemakers, the business owners didn't seem to care. They saw the money and were like, "Come on in, folks." So the outlaws could freely roam around Tombstone without worrying about getting kicked out. But you know what? This spendthrift behavior of the cowboys caused some trouble too. It kept the cycle of crime and corruption going. So it's like a love-hate relationship between the outlaws and the businesses. It shows how complicated things were in the Wild West and how people had to make deals to survive in that tough frontier life. Number 18. Boot Hill Grave. Tombstone Cemetery got famous as Boot Hill, a nickname they used back in the Old West for burial grounds where gunslingers who died with their boots on were laid to rest. It was like a symbol of the town's wild and lawless nature, where folks met violent ends. Some pretty notorious folks were buried there, including the 3 guys from the OK Carl gunfight, White Oaks brothers, Virgil and Morgan, and their buddy Doc Holliday. They went into that showdown, but sadly, they didn't make it out alive. Scary. Boot Hill became a spooky reminder of the Wild West's dangerous life, showing the cost of seeking wealth, power, and justice. With all those gunfight legends resting there, it's no surprise this place became a must-see spot for anyone curious about the thrilling and often tragic stories of Tombstone's past. Number 17. Cowboy equals trouble. Back in the day, Tombstone was a town where criminal groups were on the rise, and one of the most infamous ones was the Cochise County Cowboys. These guys started off as ranchers and cowhands, but then they ditched the honest work and turned to a life of crime. They became so well known that they even influenced how we use the term cowboy today. Funny thing is, back then calling a respectable rancher a cowboy was actually an insult. It showed how big the difference was between the law-abiding ranchers and those outlaw dudes who started using the term for their criminal deeds. The Cochise County Cowboys left a real impact on Tombstone's history and the whole Wild West era. They changed how people saw cowboys in pop culture, making everything even more intriguing and complicated. Number 16. Rise of crime. Being so close to the Mexican border, Tombstone became a hotspot for criminal stuff. Some folks in the area decided to ditch the straight and narrow and get into smuggling. They took advantage of the porous border, finding ways to profit from the tax differences between Mexico and the USA. See, in Mexico, they slapped heavy taxes on cattle and booze, making these things super valuable for smuggling. So these shady characters would steal cattle and alcohol from Mexico and sneak it all across the border to sell at a fat profit in America. By dodging taxes and exploiting the economic gap between the countries, these smugglers made big bucks. But their sneaky business not only messed with the local economy but also added to the whole lawless and chaotic vibe of the Wild West era. The border's leakiness just gave these criminals another way to make things even more complicated in Tombstone's history. Number 15. The town you don't want to be in. Back in Tombstone, chaos and violence were like everyday buddies. Total lawlessness, guns blazing, and violence everywhere. But one gunfight in particular stole the show. The infamous OK Carl shootout in 1881. This deadly face-off had the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, and their pal Doc Holliday up against a gang of outlaws. 3 bad guys and 3 good guys bit the dust, making it one hell of a fierce and lethal showdown. That gunfight at the OK Carl became a symbol of the crazy lawlessness and danger that gripped Tombstone back then. This event was the Wild West drama at its finest, showing all the power struggles and chaos of that time. It's been etched into history and turned into a legendary piece of the Western mythos. Number 14. Tombstone's Deadly Mines. Tombstone was all about that mining, and it brought in loads of cash for the town. But man, working in those mines was seriously dangerous. There were accidents and cave-ins happening all the time, and sadly, many miners lost their lives. What made things worse was that some mine owners didn't really care about safety rules or treating their workers right. They were all about making a quick buck, even if it meant putting their employees in harm's way. The loss of lives and the suffering of the miners and their families is a reminder of how tough things were for those folks who slaved away underground, making the town thrive. It's a real eye-opener about why we need to stand up for labor rights and make sure workers are safe, no matter what industry they're in. Safety should always come first. Number 13. Wonderful sense of humor. So, before Ed Schiffelin set off on his wild adventures to explore Cochise County for precious minerals, a buddy of his, Al Sieber, was like, "Dude, you better think twice. That place is like a war zone with all the Native American tribes and the American government fighting it out. You might end up with your own tombstone." But you know what? Schiffelin was one gutsy guy. He didn't let the risks of the warning scare him off. He was dead set on finding that shiny treasure and getting rich. And guess what? His determination paid off big time. He struck silver ore, and that's how Tombstone, the legendary mining town, was born. Pretty crazy how the warning he got turned into a famous story. You never knew when you'd find fortune or danger right around the corner. Number 12. The Godfather of the Old West. Alright, let me tell you about Old Man Clanton. After being a Confederate home guardsman in the Civil War, he settled down in Arizona to ranch. But don't be fooled. His transition from soldier to rancher wasn't honorable at all. This guy was notorious for being a thief and a murderer. He even became the big boss of the infamous Cochise County Cowboys. His ranch was like the headquarters for a bunch of outlaws he hired to work for him. And guess what? His sons were just like him, following in his footsteps and making names for themselves in that gang. As the head honcho of the Cowboys, Clanton made sure they spread chaos and violence all over the region. His role in all the gang's dirty activities left a lasting mark on Tombstone's history. Number 11. It was just a personal preference. Let me tell you about the Cochise County Cowboys. A bunch of real troublemakers. And Johnny Ringo was like their poster boy for bad behavior. This guy had a quick temper and landed in Tombstone in 1879. Wasting no time stirring up trouble. One time, he was in a saloon and offered a drink of whiskey to a guy named Louis Hancock. But boy, things went south real fast. Louis happened to be an off-duty U.S. deputy marshal. And when he said no to his offer, it turned into a full-blown fight. In the heat of the moment, Ringo lost it and shot Hancock dead. This was just the start of more notorious clashes and the whole lawlessness and violence that made Tombstone such a crazy place during those Wild West days. Number 10. Before Earp. Before the Earp brothers showed up, the place was swarming with a bunch of nasty outlaws known as the Clanton Gang. Led by Old Man Clanton and his sons Ike, Finn, and Billy, they were a real lawless crew. The Cowboys, as they were also called, had a rep for violence and trouble. But when the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, came into town with their buddy Doc Holliday, things got tense real quick. The Cowboys weren't happy about it, and clashes were inevitable. That's how we got the epic gunfight at the OK Carl. This showdown between the Earps and the Clanton Gang became a huge moment in Tombstone's history. It showed how they fought for law and order in a town that was a hotbed of chaos and violence. Number 9. Doc Holliday Tragic Death. Doc Holliday was one heck of a character in Tombstone, a legendary gambler and gunslinger we can't forget. But here's the sad part. He also had tuberculosis, which messed him up big time. Poor Doc's health went downhill fast when he was in Tombstone, and at just 36, he tragically kicked the bucket. It added even more sadness to the town's wild history. The local newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph, was like the town's loudspeaker for all the crazy stuff happening. Shootings, murders, crimes, you name it, they reported it. Reading those headlines was like a chilling ride through to Tombstone's heyday. It gave folks a real glimpse of the lawlessness and danger that was the Wild West era, and that's why the newspaper had a big impact on how we see the history of Tombstone today. Number 8. Who killed Johnny Ringo? So, after the OK Carl, Johnny Ringo, part of the Cowboys gang, joined Sheriff Johnny Band's posse to go after the Earps and their buddies. But here's the twist. You know how movies can mess things up? They might show Ringo leading the posse or dying in some big gunfight, but that's not the real deal. On July 14, 1882, they found Johnny Ringo's body leaning against a tree in Arizona. He had a bullet in his temple, and they called it a suicide. They buried him not far from where they found him. But the truth about his death is still a big mystery. People keep wondering if it was really suicide or if someone had it in for him. That's the thing with Johnny Ringo. Even his end is full of intrigue. It just adds another layer of mystery to the already wild and captivating history of Tombstone and the Wild West. Number 7. The Bloody Birdcage. The Birdcage Theater in Tombstone was no ordinary theater, that's for sure. It was a wild mix of a saloon, brothel, and gambling hall, a real hot spot for chaos and rowdiness. This place was infamous for its violent brawls and even murders. Talk about a dark and dangerous joint. Over 26 deaths happened right there on its premises, making it one of the deadliest spots in town. All kinds of folks flocked to the Birdcage. Miners, cowboys, outlaws, and gamblers. Booze, gambling, and loose morals made it a ticking time bomb of tension, leading to crazy fights that sometimes turned deadly. Sure, it was a center of fun and indulgence in the Wild West, but the Birdcage Theater's legacy is marked by violence and tragedy. That's why it's forever etched in the wild and colorful history of Tombstone. Number 6. The Bisbee-Tombstone Copper Mine Conflict. Back in 1888, Tombstone and Bisbee, two towns in Arizona, went nuts fighting over super valuable copper mines in the area. This feud was no joke, and it turned into a deadly mess that left a lasting scar in their history. The towns had been eyeing those mines for a while, and it was like a battle for who would get rich first. The towns had been eyeing those mines for a while, and it was like a battle for who would get rich first. The competition and bad blood between them were off the charts. Shootouts and sabotage became the norm, and people on both sides lost their lives. Things got real crazy when some Bisbee miners whipped out a homemade cannon to attack a Tombstone mine, causing serious damage and making the situation even worse. Everyone tried to stop the madness, but it was tough. This whole copper mine conflict showed how far folks would go for money and power. It's a grim reminder of the ruthless side of frontier life and the wild competition in the Old West mining industry. Number 5. Flood of Trouble. Back in 1886, the folks in Tombstone were stoked about finding a new water source. It seemed like a total win, but who knew this would mess everything up big time? The water started flooding into the mines, and even the pumps couldn't handle it. Then, bam! A massive fire destroyed the pumps at the General Central mine, and it flooded too. All the miners were super frustrated, and they had to bail on Tombstone. They found jobs in Bisbee's copper mines and other new mining towns. This whole worker exodus hit places like Charleston and Millville hard. With all the miners leaving, Tombstone lost its mojo and started going downhill. The once happening mining town turned into a ghost town as everyone moved onto greener pastures, all because of a water discovery that backfired big time. Bummer. Number 4. OK Carl Aftermath. After the OK Carl showdown, things went nuts for years. Instead of calming down, the Earps and the Cowboys got even angrier at each other. They went on a crazy rampage of revenge, and the whole thing got dubbed the Earp Vendetta Ride. It just added to Tombstone's rep for being wild and violent. The gunfight itself was like a movie, and people couldn't get enough of it. Newspapers went crazy over it, and dime novels turned the Earps and Doc Holliday into heroes. The legend of the fight grew, making these guys larger than life and securing their spots in history. But here's the thing. Historians still argue about what it all meant. Some say it was a big turning point, showing the end of Tombstone's lawless days. Others think it just highlights the crazy violence that was everywhere in the Wild West. Number 3. Vigilante Justice. When it came to law enforcement in Tombstone, things were a real mess. Vigilante justice was the name of the game. These groups took the law into their own hands, dishing out violence and even resorting to lynching to deal with criminals they thought were threats. Some said it was needed to keep the town in check, but let's be real. It left a dark cloud over the whole place. With no proper legal system, people felt they had to take matters into their own hands. But the problem was, they didn't care who got hurt. Innocent folks often paid the price as justice got served without any fair process or following the law. Seeing all this vigilante stuff reminds us how dangerous it is when folks go wild with revenge. It's a big wake-up call about the importance of a fair law enforcement system that protects everyone's rights in a community. Number 2. The Chinese Massacre of 1881. The Chinese Massacre of 1881 was a real horror show that left a scary mark on Tombstone, Arizona. Imagine this. On February 8, 1881, a bunch of racist thugs, about 300 of them, went crazy and attacked the Chinese folks in town. They barged into their homes and businesses, dragging them out to the streets for some brutal beatings and torture. It's heartbreaking to say, but at least 4 Chinese men didn't make it out alive. They were lynched, killed in the most brutal and public way, with their bodies left hanging from telegraph poles like some messed up spectacle. This whole massacre is a dark and disturbing chapter in Tombstone's history, showing how deep racism and violence ran in the Old West. It's a grim reminder of the ugly injustices and intolerance marginalized groups faced back then. We gotta confront this dark past and work for equality, justice, and respect for all, no matter where they come from. Number 1. Who started the fire? Back on June 22, 1881, a massive fire ripped through the business district in Tombstone. Total disaster. The firefighters couldn't do much because there was hardly any water. So many homes got swallowed by the flames, and folks were super ticked off at Field Marshal Ben Sippy for not stopping the looting. They had enough of Sippy's lackluster leadership, so they quickly replaced him with Virgil. But guess what? The Clanton gang wasn't happy about it and got even angrier. All those tensions boiled over on October 26, 1881. In the legendary gunfight at the OK Carl. It was like 30 seconds of madness that etched itself into history. Tombstone felt the effects for a long time, and even now, we can still feel its impact. Wild times. And that's a wrap for the 20 chilling facts about Tombstone, Arizona, the wildest town in the Old West. Now, as the sun sets on this infamous town, remember to keep your 6-gun shooter handy and join us on our next adventure through history. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and stay subscribed. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.